a quick roll call so we all have an idea of who is on the call right now. So I think that, Shapiro, I think you have the list in front of you. If you would just go down the names, and when you hear your name, please just say that you are here.
Okay. So we have Deshane Bennett of the National Council of Urban Indian Health. We have Dana Kingfisher. Dana, all right, can you unmute your phone, please? I sent her the access code, so we'll go on. I have Ernestine Belcourt on the phone.
Yes, here, Deshane.
Hi, Ernestine.
Hi, Tony.
I have Jennifer Ruiz. Jennifer,
Hello,
are you
Jennifer?
online? And then we have Ida Salas.
Who is that?
Ida Salas. I sent her the audio pin. She has yet to sign in.
Okay.
And then we have Ricardo Torres, who I just sent the access pin to.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think I will just go ahead and begin. And if you're just unmuting your phone or just getting dialed in, you haven't missed anything important yet. Hello, who was that? Did someone just speak?
Sounds like it.
This is really a challenge trying to do. A couple of folks. Dana, you can hear me, Dana? Because we cannot hear your voice, Dana. So that may be because you've got your phone muted. Ernestine, I can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah, I'm moving around my chair.
Ernestine, are you by yourself, Ernestine?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Is this the same thing that went over in Billings? Is it the same session? No. No. Oh, okay. All right. I just wondered.
Right. What this is a 1-hour webinar, and the focus on this is going to be on leadership, and it's really going to be on leadership in the partnership between the chief executive and the board chairs. And so that's the focus here. And let me just go quickly back up and introduce myself to folks who don't know me. I'm Tony Scucci. I live in Portland, Maine, and I've been working with NCUI for quite a few years now, putting together various trainings for boards for the urban programs, and then some other work with the National Indian Health Board and some other groups as well. Last year, in partnership with NCUI, we put together a series of 3 webinars on different kinds of board training topics. And this year, we put together a series of 6 additional webinars on various board training governance topics. And so this webinar today is the last in that series. And the focus here really is on, as I said, that kind of dyad, the leadership and leadership qualities in ways in which the chief executive and the board leader can work more effectively together. Oh, somebody's phone is ringing?
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody know who that is? Okay. Okay, we're gonna. If it's okay, we'll just keep pushing through here, and the technical problems I think will resolve themselves. So the webinar really was designed to have each executive and his or her board's leader present or connected up on phone in this call, and that apparently is not the case for all of you or many of you. And that's fine. We'll just figure a way to work around that. It really is a challenging kind of format for trying to do this kind of leadership training, because it always works much better when we can be sitting together in a room. So anyhow, we'll do the best we can. And what we're really going to do is look at ways to maximize the benefits you can get out of the partnership that you have with your board leader or with your chief executive. And we're going to focus on two areas, really. One is going to be on leadership skills, and the other is going to be on personal qualities. I also want to take this opportunity to remind you all that I'm available in any way as a resource after this webinar. Please feel free to send me an email anytime. If you have any questions or comments, or if you'd like any information, I have access to all kinds of resources around board development and governing issues. I also want to thank Shane for bringing NCUI, working with him and NCUI on setting all these up, and also thank you, Shapiro, for being the tech support person today. I really appreciate that. All these webinars are or will be posted on the NCUI website, and they'll be available to you into the future. So that's another thing I wanted to make sure everyone on the call knows about. Looks like we have about 9 people on, and I don't hear or see anyone else joining in, so I think we'll just proceed and move forward with this. There we go. So what we're going to accomplish today, what we hope to accomplish, is really to develop more effective leadership team in the participating dyad. And when you see the word dyad, that simply means the executive and the board chair from each program. So we're really looking at that partnership, and really also to generate ideas about how we can be more effective as leaders in those partnerships in particular. So I really want to invite as much conversation as possible. Please feel free to share your thoughts and your stories as we proceed. I came across a quote that I thought was kind of, I always think of when I think about leadership. And I'd like to share this quote with people because leadership is one of those terms that's it's a big fuzzy term. I mean, it can mean a million different things. This is a quote from Peter Drucker, and he talks about management and leadership and how to distinguish them. Management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. And I think that's a very telling kind of quote. And I'll share with you an example from my thinking about that quote. When we think about how a organization, how a board and staff work with a budget, making sure that you balance your budget, making sure that the budget is balanced, is doing things right. To distinguish that from leadership, you would be different. The leadership would be making sure that we're allocating the financial resources in a way that align with our values. So doing the right things and balancing the budget. Leadership is about making sure we're spending money where we ought to be spending money, and that we're spending our money and bringing in our money in ways that are consistent with our values. So that's a different way of thinking about things. And people often differentiate folks who are really capable at managing but not too effective as leaders, and people who are really good at leading but aren't too effective as managers. And those are kind of oversimplifications, I think. But there's some truth to that. Some people are naturally oriented towards managing, and some are more naturally oriented towards leading. What we want to do is really accomplish 3 major things today. Maximize the potential benefits of that partnership that each of you are in some way. Gain a greater understanding of each participant's own leadership qualities and styles. So this is an opportunity for each of us on the phone to reflect on our own particular leadership qualities and styles. And then as a framework, we're going to talk some about these 5 core leadership competencies, and we'll get to them in a few minutes. It's simply one way to think about the skills required in developing leaders. So that's what we're hoping to accomplish. And we go to the framework and the agenda for today. It's going to be an open discussion about leadership, how everyone on this webinar thinks about and perceives leadership and defines leadership. We'll look at that partnership again and spend most of our time on that. We'll focus on some of these core competencies. And again, let me say, these are 5 areas that if you can look at and you can say these are the core competencies around leadership: the ability to take risks, the ability to make good decisions, delegating, a critical kind of competency area for leaders, inspiring and visioning. We'll touch some on these, but we won't really have time to go in depth into any one of them in particular, but I think you'll see that they'll be integrated throughout the webinar. We'll look at qualities of leadership, and then a notion about stretching your organization, which comes from someone who really has some ideas about how you can really stretch your organization, move it from a level that it's at to another level, to a higher level, and then an evaluation of the session. When we conclude the webinar, if Shapiro, we forgot to talk about this beforehand, but if he can post the link to the evaluation, there's a very simple SurveyMonkey. If you all could just get to that and provide us with your feedback. It would be really helpful and appreciated. So that's the direction we're going today. I'll give you an idea of how we've laid out the day. So first thing I want to do is talk some about skills and personal qualities. And I guess I would ask you all, just think about this for a minute, and perhaps think about someone you know who you see as a really effective leader. And if you think about that person, I'd like everyone to kind of get that person in your mind right now, someone that you see as a really effective leader. And then talk a little bit with each other here about what you see are the skills or the personal qualities that that person has. What is it about that person that makes them a leader? What are those kind of skills or qualities? What are the things that you see in the person you have in mind?
So this is Deshane. I guess just to get the conversation started, I think that for me, one of the main qualities about the leader that I'm thinking of is that there's an ability to see the bigger picture and not just focus on the little things. The little things obviously are important, but to be able to not only to see the bigger picture, but to express a vision of what that bigger picture looks like helps move people in that direction.
That's an excellent thought, and thank you for sharing that. And thanks for going first, Deshane, and priming the pump. You're absolutely right. When you think about this ability to share the big picture, not everyone has that ability. I want to go back here to these core competencies. When you think about the idea of sharing the big picture, being able to see it and sharing it really has to do with the vision, being able to see this big thing, to see where your organization or where your community will be in the future and what that will look like. That's the idea of being able to see the big picture. And in addition to that, you need this particular set of competencies around inspiring people to the vision, and bringing people along. So those are really key skills, somebody who can see this big picture and inspire people to move towards it. What are some others?
Someone that could work independently or just take the lead, and not have to be told to maybe read your mind, so to speak.
Absolutely, somebody that can kind of is an independent thinker and can act on their own in a way, at least to get things started. One of the things leaders have to be careful about is that you have to always be a little bit ahead of everybody.
Yes. That's
kind of what leading is about. But if you get too far ahead, you end up just being somebody out for a walk all by yourself.
Right.
So it's the idea of kind of leading your forces, leading your troops, but not getting too far ahead that you're out there by yourself. So sure, that's another great quality. Are there others?
Yeah, I think taking risks. This is Ricardo from Sacramento, and I think taking risk is certainly one. I think working in Indian country, there are places in our bureaucracies we don't go to in terms of crossing lines because the administration or a program wants to do certain things and we don't like doing them. And I think a good leader shows us how to take those healthy risks to get to where we need to go in a way that's safe and brings the whole group forward with you.
Right. Can you think, Ricardo, if you would, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but kind of a specific example of you, perhaps, when you've taken a risk?
It's probably easier for me to give you an example of my CEO.
Okay.
And I think that our CEOs, we established the center, the clinic. I mean, I think that opening up dialogue about how we're going to plan the center to the public, as the Indian public, and making it a very transparent process, I think is risky in Indian country because you get, the influence of tribal leaders and tribal councils and tribal elders who may not necessarily want to go there because they are, they're set in ways of how things should be done. And I think that our CEO was able to take risk in opening up public dialogue to include all these groups and doing some of the things that you're talking about, envisioning, inspiring, to let them know how this is going to be okay. We're going in this direction, and I know that there's some. This is an urban clinic, but also, if you look at some of the tribal clinics, they have problems with this because maybe the council doesn't want to do something, and you have to do it anyway. And there's always a battle between what you have to do, and having a leader who is able to translate that into a healthy risk, and being brave enough to move people from what they understand to what can be, and making that a safe place to go.
Yeah, and that's, and you just raised some really good points. I mean, it's not just about you taking a risk and kind of crossing a bridge. You have to bring others along, and leaders, have the ability to do that. This whole notion of taking risks, I think, is really central. In order to be an effective leader, you have to be able to take reasonable risks, and that means, you have to develop skills around taking risks. And one of the things that happens when you start exploring your own life and looking back and looking at other times in your life when you've taken risks, small and large, you start to see a pattern, because taking risks is a transferable skill. So, for example, when I was young, one of the risks I took was to learn how to ride a bicycle. And it was a real risk. There was a lot riding on that. When I was a kid, where I grew up, to ride a bicycle meant you were mobile, you get around. But there was all this kind of peer pressure and the fear of embarrassment if you got on the bike and fell down, and all these little kind of things that when you look at it in one little section of your life seem small. But when you start connecting all the dots, you realize that the very skills I used and develop around taking risks, around trying something new like riding a bicycle, are the same kind of competencies I use now around risks, around trying new technologies, for example, like webinars. So I think all this stuff is really transferable, and to the extent that each of us can figure out what abilities we have around risk, what are our experiences, what can we learn from them, and then you find some really amazing patterns in that. And that really leads to something I think that's critical here. When I ask this question about skills and personal qualities, I think there are really two things that are absolutely essential. And you can, and I'll ask you all to see if you agree with me on this. People that are competent leaders have a very high awareness of who they are. They have a knowledge and an understanding of themselves, and they have the ability to manage themselves. And as the note above, even to remain calm and focused under stress, the ability to manage yourself in different situations. So the example that Ricardo shared here is a CEO who has an idea, a vision. It's informed by his values. He knows that some people are with him on this. Some people may not be. Some of those people who are not may simply be afraid or not sure. He needs to take his awareness of his ability to move things forward and really make that happen. And so I think these are really two keys: being aware of your knowledge, who you are, and understanding who you are, and then your ability to manage yourself in difficult situations. I think these two are essential, and I would ask you all to, if you agree or not. Do you know anyone that any of those people you were thinking of who were capable leaders who didn't have these as the essential qualities? Everyone agrees. Terrific.
Absolutely.
I think it really is a fascinating thing when you think about it. And we'll come back to some examples of this in a moment, which I think are really striking, and one of them is really current in the news now. But this is what I see as the kind of personal qualities that are absolutely essential: being aware of who you are, knowing who you are, and being able to manage yourself. You learn about yourself simply by taking the time to reflect, and by surrounding yourself with people who you trust, and who can give you honest information and help you see certain qualities within yourself. and the ability to manage yourself is a skill. That means you have to practice it, and the more you practice it, the better you get at it.
And developing a confidence in that, I think that a proficiency in doing that, I think, is ultimately where we're going with that.
That you're exactly right, and the way you.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about anyone you know who's proficient in anything. They didn't just start at proficiency. They started at not knowing what they were doing and had to work their way up. Yeah, and that explains why often you'll see somebody will come onto a board of directors and they've never been on a board before, and they come on. And they may emerge as a leader of that organization, but they probably won't emerge within the first 2 weeks. It might be after serving for a year or two, getting a better sense of who they are, and then developing and having opportunities to practice leading in that setting. Let's ask a kind of similar question about the board chair chief executive partnership. What do you have to have in it? What are the basic ingredients of an effective board chair chief executive partnership? What do you have to have in order for that to be an effective partnership? What do you need?
Clear vision.
Trust. Clear vision. Say it again, please.
Clear vision, trust.
Trust.
Those are the two I'll offer.
Yeah. Other thoughts? Others?
There needs to be, in line with the trust, there needs to be open and honest communication, which obviously there can't be without the trust, but there needs to be two-way communication that's open and honest.
Yeah.
I agree with that, Tony.
Yeah.
Without that, you really, you can't work with them. Or, I mean, I shouldn't say you can't. It's really difficult to work with the board chair if they're not open and honest with you, and understanding of what you're having to deal with on a day-to-day basis in our organizations.
You're absolutely right. Every time I think of the word partnership or relationship, trust is really key. You've got to have it, and it's got to be mutual. It's got to be both ways. And one of the ways you see that, what trust looks like, is that people are communicating, as Shane was saying, communicating in a way that's open and honest. And open and honest means honest. I mean, it's it's the kind of relationship you may have with your best friend, somebody who's going to tell you when you're acting like a jerk, not just be a yes person all the time. Somebody who can be that honest with you. And I think what you said, Ernestine, is important to underscore that when you think about the role of the CEO and the fact that you have a board of directors and you have a CEO, and you have to bring these two forces together, that when your boards are looking at who's going to be the next board chair and the next board chair, and you go on that way, that it's really a good idea for boards to involve the CEO in the conversations about that. And it's not to say that the CEO should be able to choose who the board chair is, but it's simply to say for the partnership to work, the CEO has to have some input into which people he or she is going to be able to work with, to try and have some kind of complementarity and compatibility. Otherwise it won't work, because you won't have these basic ingredients.
And I have Tony, that reassurance too of support, on your day-to-day decisions we have to make. Sometimes we're faced with difficult situations or a lot of challenges, and drama and things like that. And if you don't have your board support, then that could really hamper a lot of things you're trying to do, especially with like corrective actions or disciplinary actions and things like that. If they're not there to support you, you don't have nowhere to go.
You're absolutely right. And I always say to boards and to board leaders that you can't be neutral about your CEO. You have to be biased. You have to come from you have to have a presumption that the CEO is doing his or her job well. That's the only way they can do the job, because as a CEO, you're the one that's taking a lot of big risks. You're the one that's out there. You've got your neck out there. You can't do that work unless you feel confident that your board stands behind you. So that's really a key point.
And I think you also have to consider yourself a partner. I think a lot of times in some of the boards that I participate, it's always the aboveness of the board chair over the CEO attitude, or vice versa. And you work for me, kind of a thing. And I think that seeing yourself more as a partner and in a collaboration, and accepting that as your role as chair is a healthier way of approaching this relationship. Because if you don't, then you either talk down to the other person or you feel you're being talked down to. So I think there's got to be some kind of equality and partnership here. So I think that's important for the trust as well as for your effective communication. Nobody likes being talked down to or be told that, well, I'm the boss and you're going to do this, et cetera. So I think there's a partnership involved here.
Oh, sure. You're absolutely right. And, you could say technically, the board through the board chair can tell the executive what he or she should do.
Right.
And technically that may be accurate, but that's not the way anything gets done. And that you don't have to frame this partnership as hierarchical, just as you're saying. You can frame it as in terms of an equal partnership, that each person has something unique and valuable to bring to it. And when we put the two parts together, we get more than just one whole. We get a lot more.
And hey, Tony, I'd just like to add that the availability of the chairperson is very important too. If they're not going to be available, why take on the role?
Exactly. One of the things that I encourage executives to do all the time, and another reason, Ernestine, for executives to be part of the process for figuring out who's going to be the board leader, is that you want to have somebody who not only is compatible in terms of their styles and personalities, but also somebody who's going to be able to be there, somebody who can stay in touch. It's a really good practice for board chairs and executives to be in touch on a regular basis. And depending on the size of your organization and the complexity of your organization, it can be something, as once a week, a 10-minute phone call. It could be even more, or it could be less. It all depends. But some kind of regular, frequent contact. And again, if we're talking about a partnership, the way that you develop that is to spend time together, focused on particular goals and objectives. So you're absolutely right. If somebody is considering being a chair of a board and they're not going to be available to the CEO for support, for guidance, for accountability, they probably aren't going to be able to do the job. Great points. Thank you all very much. This relationship is really key because it's where all the governance and management comes together. And just as someone was saying earlier, the governance and management doesn't have to be seen as a hierarchy. It can be seen as a kind of equals, two parts to a whole. It doesn't have to be one above the other. They can be right next to each other. What matters is that they connect in a way that makes sense. You really need these things, as you were talking about, the idea of mutual respect and getting clear about expectations. It's really important when you have, if you're an executive and you have a new board chair, to sit down with that person and have a conversation about what can you expect of each other. And I'll tell you that organizations where I see this happening, the partnerships really develop. So it's the idea of sitting down beforehand and simply saying, okay, how are we going to hitch horses here? What can I do to help you be successful as the board chair? And the board chair is saying to the executive, what can I do for you to help you be successful as the executive? And what are we going to do when we have disagreements? Because we're bound to have them. How should we disagree? How should we keep each other informed when it feels like somebody's stepping on somebody's toes? You can have those conversations beforehand in a kind of preemptive way, and it helps to solidify the partnership going forward. The regular and honest communication. DeShane brought that up, and I think you brought that up too in terms of availability, Ernestine. It's got to be regular. It's got to be honest. You've got to be talking to each other and paying attention to the relationship. And anyone on the call who knows me knows that I talk about attending to relationships all the time. This is about this partnership with the executive and the board chair every now and again saying to each other, how are we doing here? How are we working together? What can we do to strengthen this partnership? Attending to the relationship is really key. And here I kind of made this little diagram, but this really shows where you have the governance side of the organization and the management side, and they are not hierarchical. They really come together on a plane that's parallel. And it's the board leader and the chief executive where the organization really come together. And in that partnership, some things are blue and some things are red, but there's some stuff that's in this gray area, and that's the place where when you've got a good partnership and a good relationship where you have frequent contact and mutual respect, things work out really well in that area. Just saying that when we think about leadership transitions, and I kind of just alluded to this, but whenever there's a new board chair or a new executive, a whole new relationship has to be developed. You kind of start at the beginning again. And if you are the executive and a new board chair is coming in, don't assume that things are going to be like they were with the previous board chair. They're probably going to be different because we're talking about different people. So sitting down and getting specific with each other about how can we work together is the best way to get that partnership off to a good start. I always like this quote: "He that would be a leader would be must be a bridge." And when you think about this partnership, it's exactly what we're talking about, and I think many comments already are consistent with that. A bridge connects two different places. That's what you need to do. And bridges aren't hierarchical; they are parallel. They connect two places together. And leaders have to be people who can build bridges. Thoughts or comments about anything we talked about so far?
I'm following you.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to go too fast or too slow. I came across this that I wanted to share with you all because this, I think, these are 10 commitments for better partnerships, and they really are. These are, I think, what serves a really good framework for every partnership, including one each of you may have with your respective board leader or executive director. When you're a board leader or an executive director, the first commitment you've got to make to each other is that you both have to work to keep everybody focused on the mission. Critically important to get focused on the mission. The example that Ricardo was sharing earlier about his center and some of the changes that are going on, I will bet that what's probably not changing is the mission. And so when you introduce new ideas and people get a little anxious or there's disagreements, bringing everyone back to the mission is really critical. So a commitment you make to each other is a commitment that you'll work together to get everyone focused on the mission. Clearly and define each other's roles, and respect those roles. The board chair is not the executive. That's not his or her job, and vice versa. So just making a commitment that we will clearly define and respect the boundaries that we have between us and the roles that we each share, because they are two very different and distinct roles. Avoiding territorial behavior. You really have to put the best interests of your organization above everything, and you have to do that in your partnership. So committing to each other to do that, and to not fight over who's going to do what, but to simply work out who can do what best. Adding innovative value. Strong relationship is necessary, but it's not sufficient. So all we've been talking about around having a really strong working relationship is not an end. It is simply a means to an end. Having a good relationship, it's, I always think of it as what I always say to parents, and anyone on the phone who's a parent knows this. To be a good parent, it's essential that you love your kids, but love isn't enough. You've got to have some other stuff. To have a good relationship simply means you have a good relationship. The idea of taking this good relationship and having it be productive, having it be constructive, having it lead to new ends, to better ends for your organization, that's where you want to go. A commitment to each other to help make the board stronger. Healthy, strong partnership, a CEO knows that it's in his or her best interest to have a really strong board, a board that's going to not rubber stamp, a board that's going to challenge him or her in respectful ways, a board that's going to generate new ideas and involve itself in real deliberations. This makes an organization and a board stronger. And so, there's these kind of commitments around, let's commit to make this a stronger board. A sixth commitment, develop a positive dynamic between the staff and the board. There are some organizations that I've worked with where the CEO will say to his or her staff, we don't want you to have any contact with the board or the board chair, and tries to maintain this black and white boundary. So much potential is unrealized when you try to have those kind of black and white boundaries. Although there are risks to having lots of interactions. There are risks to having board and staff in communication a lot, but the benefits can outweigh those risks if you can manage that gray area effectively. Making communication a priority, to simply commit to each other that we're going to communicate. We're going to both promise each other that we're going to communicate in a way that's open and honest. Maintain a united front. It's really important when the board chair and the executives sit down and work out some issue that when they come out of that meeting, they're presenting one message, one front. It's in the best interest of the organization to do that. And similarly, when a board of directors is in a meeting and there's a lot of disagreement and contention and you finally work it out and you come to a resolution and a decision, you walk out of the room as one body, not as a bunch of people with different opinions. You come out trusting the wisdom of the collective decision. Number 9, protect and support one another. It's really important when you're entering into a new partnership. And this is one of those areas, too, where I would encourage you, if you haven't, or the next time you have the opportunity, when you enter into a new partnership with the board chair or an executive, to talk about what does this really look like? How am I going to, what does support look like? Support is one of those fuzzy words too. To get as concrete as you can about what will it look like? How will we protect and support one another? What would that actually look like in real life? And then 10, and finally, keep passions and emotions in check. When you think about the person who's the leader of the board and the person who's the staff leader, they're probably two people who have incredible passion for the organization, have invested lots of energy in the organization, are ambitious in somewhat, but at the same time, and so that's stuff that can be potentially a strength or a weakness. Trying to temper all that passion, ambition with wisdom and patience, it's a good way to take two people who are real leaders and have them kind of mesh together rather than to always be locking horns with each other. So those are the kind of 10 commitments that I thought I would share with you all, and I guess I would invite your thoughts or feedback on any of that. Anything resonate for you in any of these 10 things?
Well, I think they're great. Incidentally, I really like these. Really thought-provoking for me. Just reflecting on my relationship with my CEO, and where some of the stuff is pretty clear to me. I do well. Some things I may need to work on, but I thought on the previous page you had something that really stuck to me in terms of the positive, or doing the positive dynamic between staff and board. I mean, I thought we do meet with staff on occasion after we have our retreat, our yearly retreat. It's the board meets with the entire staff to tell them what we resolve, where we're going, any changes, and that kind of stuff, so that they have an opportunity to address those with us. But in addition to that, if there's any concerns by department, let's say behavioral health may have a department, we do meet with them as a staff. And so I think it's most important for us to make sure they don't see us as a way around the CEO, so that we become dumping grounds for their complaints and that kind of stuff. I think they need to know that that's not our role. That our role is simply to support them, to understand them, and to move our agenda, make sure they understand our agenda to move that forward in their department. There are people who might say, well, can I talk to you for a little bit or something? And they might want to dump on a decision that maybe the CEO made, but it's our role to say, well, we'll make sure that it gets to the CEO and she responds to you directly, et cetera, so that they don't see us as taking that and running with it around our CEO. But I thought that was really good.
Often I'm in organizations where I talk to staff people, and when they get real honest, I ask them, so what does the board do? They have no idea. What do those people in that room do when they come together? And, I think that, as you're describing it, it's good for the board to sit with staff from time to time around a retreat or an annual meeting to visit the center, perhaps, and as a way to demonstrate that you have a commitment to the organization, that you're not a staff person, and you're not quite a volunteer. You're one of the trustees, and you and your group of trustees are really responsible for protecting this organization and making sure that it stays true to its mission. And the more you communicate to staff that kind of message, the better, because then they have a better understanding who you are and what value you really do bring. The tendency what I see where executives try to separate their staff from the board, often that's because of some fear, and often it's not very rational, that board people are going to want to that a staff person is going to talk to a board member and want to talk about the executive, for example. You have that kind of triangulation. Well, in a healthy organization, that doesn't happen. And as you described, if a staff person comes up to you and says, gee, I want to talk about so-and-so, it's like, well, I'll let them know we're going to talk. We talked about this, but very clearly we all stay transparent here, and my job is not to intervene between you and your boss. You have to work those things out together.
Right.
And that's. Go ahead.
No, I was acknowledging your right. Yeah, right. I believe what you're saying.
I always tell folks too, it's when you're that board person and somebody approaches you, you really have to, in the moment, have to act. You can't not act, because to actually stand there and listen is to be part of the problem. You have to kind of say, okay, if I'm going to hear you out, understand that everything you tell me I'm going to share with the executive, because that's the way we do business here. And that, if you're going to talk to me about some complaint you have, I want to make sure that you've gone through the right, followed our policies and procedures around grievances and done all that first. If you've done all that, then feel free to share with me, and know that I will share everything we talk about with the executive. That kind of oversimplifies it in some ways, but there is a real value to keeping it that simple and honest. And there's clearly exceptions to those things, in some cases, but for the most part, it goes back to that whole notion of being open in your communication and being transparent. Thank you for that.
Tony, just a comment. That session you covered in Billings, you talked about your staff undermining the executive. It's really kind of difficult to deal with when you do have a person like that doing that. And if the chair engages in that, then that's really a no-no, I would say.
You're absolutely right. It's exactly what it does, or it undermines your authority, and if your authority is undermined, you cannot be an effective executive.
Exactly.
And it goes back to, I think, what you brought up earlier. The board has to be behind you 100%, unless there's some reason not to be.
Right.
Yeah, good point.
Are we going to cover how this all applies in terms of the evaluation process of the CEO, or at some point? I think your number one point could very well, be amplified to talk about how the interaction and accountability and all that applies during the evaluation process of the CEO.
Right. We did an entire webinar on that during this series, and if it's not archived, it will be, but there's a lot of information there. And really, it was one of those topics that it takes an hour to really even just start digging into it.
Oh, yeah, I agree. Yeah.
But, to just kind of briefly comment, if you're the executive director and you sit down with your new board chair, that's the time to talk about your performance review as well. And the performance review process, if it's a good one, it becomes the context for all the conversations. So if you have some performance goals that have been developed in your performance review, that becomes part of the framework for your regular communication with the board chair. So if I were the board chair, and I would be talking to you from time to time about your performance goals. How are you doing? Are you having a hard time with any of those? Is there anything that I could do or I could have the board do to help you be successful in accomplishing those goals? You know, there are all kinds of tools that will kind of facilitate this process. And I would encourage you, if there's more in-depth stuff about performance review, to look at that webinar material. And also, please feel free to contact me. I can always, give me a
my
call.
co-chair participated in that one, but.
Oh, great! Great!
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
If your co-chair has done that, have a conversation with that person and see what you could learn from his or her experiences, and perhaps talk about ways to apply that stuff.
I just thought it was a good point to understand how you can. This is a springboard. That your number one goal there is applies to not only your establishing a relationship, but it kind of carries to the different functions that you have with your CEO, both in evaluation and your daily dialogue, or the retreat, or in establishing the goals and objectives during the year. I mean, I think all those things that you talk about in your number one goal can be applied or springboard for all of those different scenarios.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So as I talked about briefly at the beginning, there are really these kind of 4 core competencies, and I think we've been touching on a lot of these already. That to lead means you have to go first. And, I believe that people have leadership qualities. Almost everybody has leadership qualities, and you use them in all different settings. Even in a personal relationship, there are times when somebody has to be the leader. I'm sure we've all experienced these in some of our personal relationships where, something doesn't feel right, there's some tension or something. Sooner or later, somebody has to say, okay, what's up? We need to talk. That's a leadership quality, to really take the risk and put it out there. And we talked some about decision-making and delegating. These are skills, so you practice these. And every time you make a decision and you learn from the decision, your next decision you're going to get better at doing. And it's kind of an ongoing practice. And I use the word practice a lot in my work. In fact, I call my work a practice because, and you all probably may think along these lines connected to healthcare, but, when you ask a medical doctor what do, they don't say I work, they say I practice. And the implication is I'm doing certain things with patients, for patients, and I'm paying attention. And I'm always learning from my patients what's working for them and what isn't. And I'm learning from the research in the field what's the state-of-the-art practice. So it's an ongoing kind of paying attention to what you're doing it, paying attention to what you learn from those lessons. And that really, I think, is key to all this. So those are these competencies. I'm going to kind of skip by them for now because I don't think I have time to talk about them in any kind of deep way. But we can some other time. And when you do get that, when you fill out the Survey Monkey, there's a question that asks for your ideas about future topics for webinars. Please feel free to share your ideas there. This next slide here really sets up, it's kind of a setup slide, and I think what this will do will reinforce the conversation we've been having, kind of put a foundation or more foundation under it. You think about qualities of leadership, there really are, you can think about these 5 kind of qualities. They have to do with your beliefs, your belief system. They have to do with your confidence, and that term has come up already on this call by several folks. Self-awareness, trust, and power and ambition, and how you manage power and ambition. So the next 5 slides touch a little bit on each one of these. Belief, really, what do you believe about yourself at work, and work? Beliefs are really at the core of your being, and these are really like, who you really are. And so being clear about that, really knowing what your beliefs are, matters. Confidence. Know who you really are and for whom you're really living your life. I mean, that sounds like a kind of grandiose statement, but this is about how you're living your life. You live your life by what you do every single day. You don't live it in a lifetime. You live it day by day. And if you're a leader of an organization, either on the board side or the staff side, this is who you are. And I will bet for the executives on the call, and you'd say, that you don't necessarily think about what you do. Like, I think it probably applies to you, Ernestine, but it's like you're the executive director, but it's more than just a job. It's what you do for a livelihood. It's what you do for a living.
Right.
It's more than just a job. You have to come to terms with your own aspirations and ideals, and not getting stuck on internal criticism. A lot of times people are always kind of criticizing themselves. I'm not good enough. I could have done it better. Well, you could always do things better, but you don't want to get stuck in always being critical of anything you may have done. Self-awareness, as I talked about earlier, fully understanding yourself, what motivates you, what your beliefs are. The more awareness you have about that, the better. And the idea that we need to focus all of our attention on our internal kind of things. When I was putting this webinar together and then going over it and doing some refining of it, this is a place where I think we can look at people who we may have thought of as outstanding leaders and come to find out that maybe we're a little disappointed in them. And so a name that comes to my mind right away that's been in the mass media for a few weeks now is General Petraeus. And if you look at General Petraeus and you try to understand and explain how could this happen, I think what you find is somebody who really kind of, I don't know what people say where I grew up, kind of got above his raisin. You get to a place where you become so well known, so highly regarded, you get put up on a pedestal, and if you come to believe that you ought to be up on a pedestal, you're in trouble. Someone like General Petraeus, and I would generalize this to people like that in other areas as well, start to believe that the rules were made for somebody else, not for them, that somehow they're special, that these rules don't apply to me. And I think that you see this positively and negatively depending on who you might look at. If you think about celebrities and famous athletes and rock stars, politicians, you'll see some of those people who are in the public spotlight and highly regarded, and maybe they're wealthy and famous, and they are still follow the rules that we all follow. And there are others in that category who really come to believe that the rules were meant for others, that somehow they're special, that they don't need to play by those rules. And I think that's a real danger when you get to that place. And the example like Petraeus or some other famous athletes and so on are really the extremes of it, but it can happen to all of us in our own smaller worlds. And I'll share with you my experience. I was an executive director for 13 years in a community agency, and at some point in that time, it came to be that I was so personified this organization, and people really put me up on some kind of pedestal, and it was I had to really work at not believing that was true. In so many ways, I'm just a regular guy, just like everybody on this call. We're just regular folks. On some level, we do things that are extraordinary, but when you get down to it, we are just regular folks, and when we all agree that there's certain rules, certain principles, certain values that we adhere to, you don't make exceptions because somebody happens to be up on a pedestal. Am I communicating? Is that making sense to folks, what I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely, for me, yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's once you get in the spotlight, something can happen to you. I was having a conversation earlier with somebody. I live in Maine, and one of the famous people in Maine is a guy named Stephen King, who writes all these horror movies and books, and he's rich and he's famous, and he lives in Bangor, Maine. And when his kids were in middle school, he coached the softball team, the little league team. He is one of these people who has always been just a regular guy, lives in the neighborhood, and then I think about him in contrast to all the celebrities in places like Hollywood and all the movies and how they live these lives that aren't even real. And then somehow people put them up on pedestals and perceive them as leaders. So I guess this is like kind of the cautionary note about this. That maybe another way to think about it is no matter what, a good dose of humility is always a good thing for everybody. And trust is one of the other key things we talked about. I always talk about trust as kind of the grease between the wheels. You want the wheels to turn, it's got to be trust. And really, it's kind of this, what they're saying. It's kind of a contract between people. If I'm going to tell you what's on my mind, I have to trust that you're going to hear me at least and be respectful of what I'm saying. And then there's power and ambition. And, these are terms that carry kind of a negative connotation usually. But people that lead do wield power, and they do have ambition. And I will bet everyone on this phone has some ambition and wields some power. It's about being aware of that and managing that, and that's what it is. Rather than to try and deny that you have these qualities, you have some power and you influence and you have ambition. So knowing that you have that and how you use those tools can make for a better leader. So those are kind of those 5 qualities. I'm going to go to the kind of last little section in here, which is this idea about stretching your organization. And as I said, if you want to look more at these, the slides will be posted at the website, and I'd be glad to send them to you if you want. But how can you stretch your organization? How can you take your organization from where it is now and move it just a little farther down the road? And so one of the ways you do that is to be innovative, to light the candle of innovation. It's really kind of poetic, but it's to innovate and to try new things. Taking risks is another thing we talked about. If you're going to stretch your organization, if you're going to move in a new direction, you've got to take some risks. Improving a little each day, I think, is a great way to think about things. You want to do something major, you do it in increments. If you can improve 1% every day, in a year you've improved 100%. I mean, it's an interesting way to think about that. Incorporating risk and innovation in your value structure. The last point on this slide here about rewarding mistakes, very often, there are some companies that I'm aware of where they actually reward people for making mistakes. There was a time, and I can't remember which company, might have been Microsoft. You know how some companies will have like an idea box? They had something where once a week they picked the biggest screw up, and the person got a bonus. And the idea wasn't to have people go out and make mistakes and do dumb things. It was to encourage people to take risks and to know that if you take a risk and it doesn't work out, if it was a reasonable risk, you're going to be rewarded. You're not going to be punished. Organizations that punish risk takers are organizations that don't go anywhere. Stretching your organization, continuing here, keeping your eyes on your values all the time, always. You have to know what they are, and you have to really try to stay as close to them as you can. Very hard to do, and leaders do this all the time, and leaders encourage it in others. When you meet as a board, the core value is your mission statement. And making sure that everything you do is aligned with that mission. That's a way to keep close to your values. Examine yourself. This goes back to that notion I was talking about earlier, a heightened level of self-awareness and an ability to manage yourself. If you have a high awareness of yourself and can manage yourself well, you will lead, you'll probably heard the expression leading by example. That's exactly what leading by example is. You be the person who's a calm influence in the turmoil, and people will catch it because it's contagious. Calmness is contagious. So being aware of yourself and managing yourself well, and there's so many examples of this that we go on forever, but that really is key to everything. Lower resistance to change. It's so true. People are more likely to go through change with you than for you. And that's that whole notion of if it's going to be something that's going to change, you're the one that's got to go first. You're the one that's got to demonstrate the confidence. You're the one that needs to inspire people to go with the change, to trust that it will be better. All this change is local, and it's all in little kind of pieces. takes time, takes patience, takes support. That, in my mind, is this idea of stretching, and this comes from a person named Peter Brinkerhoff. I want to make sure I put his but it's an interesting way to think about how you can keep yourself on track in your leadership roles in particular. Next to the last slide, I want to share with you quickly, and then we'll have a little more conversation, and we'll be out of time here. I've shared this in some other trainings. It's called the 5 Dysfunctions of Teams. And this applies to the team being the board chair and the board executive and the executive director. It also applies to the board. It applies to the management team. It applies to all your staff. It can apply to just any kind of team that you imagine. These are the dysfunctions. I just put them up here and you can look at them. The interesting way of thinking about things, but when you see any of this, when there's an absence of trust, there's a level of dysfunction. Fear of conflict. If you're the board chair and you aren't comfortable confronting the executive about something where you have a difference of opinion, then you're going to be avoiding the real issues you need to avoid. All these things, I think, are really self-explanatory, so I will just leave them there with you and maybe ask you all if you'd like to spend one more minute. Do you have any other thoughts or comments about today's webinar? Any kind of thoughts you may have, anything you'd like to share?
Tony, this is Ernestine. This is very good. I could see a lot of things that I could relate to in our organization, and I guess, it'll more or less take me to start working on a lot of different things that you've covered today, and I just wanted to thank you, and your presentations are very helpful. If you could email me this, or if we could get this through to Shane, that would be greatly appreciated.
What I would suggest, thank you for your comments. If you could check the NCUA website, maybe not immediately, but sometime over the next couple of days, a week or so, and if you can't get it there, just send me a quick email, and I will gladly. There's my email address. Just send me a quick email, and I'll send them to you.
Okay.
Let me wrap this up simply by to thank you all for your participation, and also as a reminder to the executives on the call that going forward, we're going to test out a new idea. So we're going to take a risk, and we're hoping it inspires people. And it's all these things we've been talking about. We're going to try to convene a kind of an executive director peer support coaching group. It'll be by conference call on a monthly basis, and we're going to do that starting in January. And I will be getting an email to every executive in the Urban Program Network, inviting you, and we're going to limit the numbers. So if you do have an interest, please respond, and all the details will be in that email. But I just want to let you know to look for it and consider it something you might find really valuable. Thank you again, Shapiro, for doing all the technical support, and thank you, Deshane, for the NCUA support in doing this whole series. Again, if anyone has any comments or questions, you've got my email. Please follow up anytime, and I will look forward to our paths crossing. Take care, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
All right. Thank you, Tony, very much.
You're very welcome.
Hello, Deshane.
Hey, Ricardo.
All right. We'll see you. Bye-bye. I have another conference call here. Bye-bye.
All right.
Everybody, there is a link under the chat page for the SurveyMonkey. Please fill that out for us. Thank you.